Hello, and welcome to Movie Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, press 1.
Come on.
Using your touch-tone keypad, please enter the first 3 letters of the movie title now. You've selected Agent Zero. If that's correct, press 1.
What?
You've selected Brown-Eyed Girl. If this is correct, press 1. Why don't you just tell me the name of the movie you selected?
Welcome back to the Training Babble Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Schell, and today we are back with the Gravel God, Matty Rowe. Matty, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. I'm actually more jacked than usual because I've been doing lots of shoveling lately.
He's flexing, so if you're not on YouTube and can't see it, then you're missing out.
So pasty.
Yeah. So you and I, we talk quite a bit, go on rants. I think lots of coaches are in the same boat where it's like whatever the flavor of the moment is, you hear about it a lot from athletes, or we see it on our social media feeds, podcasts, things like that. And something that's been out there for a while, and it's certainly gaining traction now, is AI. I don't even know if it stands for artificial intelligence. I think it might be, I think the A might stand for something else, and I can't remember. But you wrote an article recently, so you're on Substack, and you wrote something on there and sent it to me, and it definitely resonated with me. So I think it would be a good conversation to just talk about how we see AI as coaches and what the benefits are, what the potential downfalls are, and where it might be going in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And the article you're referencing, this particular one had to do with FastCat Coaching's CoachCat. And I want to say, I think up front, even though it's impossible to leave reading the article and not think, wow, this is very targeted and mean-spirited, it's actually what I think about AI in general. And it's like, we happen to be talking about endurance coaching and, endurance performance niche here in cycling, but I think it applies to everything. I think in general, like, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of AI. And yes, it's everywhere, and it's the new gold rush. It's a gold rush because people want to use it to get rich, because if you invest in it or happen to develop one that's useful to people, it's the implications for the time you can save and what you can do is crazy. But there's also, this is like kind of a philosophical thing, but I think we do have to mention it. It's like what's happening a lot now, whereas when Dave and I were, well, you're older than me, Dave, but like, you probably remember the encyclopedia and like reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, and like facts were more settled, I would say, or there was more of a general consensus. And one of the things that makes this time so challenging for so many people is we don't have epistemological certainty. So you hear one thing in your echo chamber and I hear another, and we think different things. Whereas before it was like we had fewer sources of information, which couldn't be as readily reinforced. So there's a lot of like really opinionated people in different camps that feel different ways. And AI feeds off of that and also nurtures that epistemological uncertainty. And I say this, and I'm going to bring in this first so we're always thinking about it. But in the article, one of the things I said is, there was this great tweet I saw by Andrew Feeney. Yeah. And they were describing one of the AIs. So this is what it is. ChatGPT is mansplaining as a service, and honestly, I can't think of a better description. A service that instantly generates vaguely plausible sounding, yet totally fabricated and baseless lectures in an instant with unflagging confidence in its own correctness on any topic, without concern, regard, or even awareness of the level of expertise of its audience.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think that's the reason I asked you to do this, is because I saw that tweet. Or what are they called nowadays? X's?
The X's.
Yeah.
The chirps.
So I saw that, and I thought that was a very appropriate description of what it is. And it's the way that I've described it to people is it just kind of fills in the blank. So what a large language model is it's trying to guess what the next likely word is in a series of words or numbers or what have you. And so it's looking at its entire database of information, and it's saying, based on all these things I've been trained on, the most likely next few words are going to be this or would be this. And so I think the issue with it at the moment, or one of the issues, is that it's very convincing and it just won't say, I don't know. It's wrong a lot, but it won't. If it doesn't know, it doesn't say, I don't know. It just makes it up.
Yeah, I would actually challenge anybody. You can trial many of these things for free. Anybody listening, whether it's cycling or whatever, like, you have your profession, you have something you know a lot about. So with that knowledge, go in and start asking the whatever AI service something, like, start a conversation with it and see how long it takes before it's confidently saying something that is, if not outright wrong, just like directionally wrong or like not enough context, and see if it owns up to it or if it's obvious to you. And now imagine that you know less about something, like, say, cycling training, and you go in and you're like, how do I get to be the fastest, whatever? Like, the same thing is happening. It's just you're not an expert in that field, or you don't have a lot of experience, so you don't know where what's BS and what's not, which is one of the big dangers, in my view.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that worries me. I think what's happened is, like, it was already an issue with the internet where people would Google something and take whatever the top result was, and that becomes the answer, rather than like going down, a few more rows and like looking at several answers and finding out which one makes the most sense and like really vetting it. Now it's taking the internet and giving you a very believable single answer. And so it's making that problem even worse, I think. So let's talk about it in the context of coaching. And I think there's lots of people, I guess I'll just comment on this, is like, you started by saying it's super hot right now. Every company is scrambling to either incorporate AI or just to say they are. Like, so Spotify is an example of this, where it's like they've always had curated playlist, but now they're AI curated, right? And so it's like, just by slapping that label on it, it raises evaluation.
Yo, I'm going to hit you with some sick beats from what you've been listening to for the past rolling 90 days. That guy, the DJ guy?
But like, so it's like everybody's scrambling to like get on that, right? And whether it makes sense or not, everybody just wants AI to be like in every product that I use as a coach. So I use Zoom, I use Canva, I use Calendly, like all these things all of a sudden started introducing AI components to it. Like, AI is in everything at this point. And so where I want to bring this back to is, I think one thing, at least one of the qualms that I have, is you have these products saying that they're AI or something like that, and they're really not. It's more automated from like a collection of training plans or workouts or something. And so it's just filling the gap between like a static training plan and kind of a more dynamic training plan. And so we'll talk about each one of those separately, but let's start talking, because this all started with the FastCat and CoachCat. So tell us, since you're familiar with it, like, what is it and how is it operating? What are the primary kind of movers as far as how it's making decisions?
Yeah, so it's its own platform that FastCat has developed, and on it sits a lot of their like plans that they used to house on Training Peaks, but now there's, I guess you could call it AI. I think it probably has some of that. Probably has an LLM baked in to a degree. I'm not sure which one. I don't know the under the hood particulars, just how people have interacted with it. And so it does a few things well. And I will do a small side here, just saying like AI definitely has a use for an athlete, and especially for coaches, I would say, that's irrefutable, in that there's a lot of sort of like drudgery, just like, I have to do this calculation, or we have to move things here, move things there. Like, if you can bake those decisions that you'd make and like do repeatedly all the time. Like what did you used to say at TPU? Like you want to do time inventory, because if something takes you 5 seconds over the course of 6 months, it takes you whatever.
Right.
Well, if you can create rules for your coaching, so whenever this happens, you always do this, but you don't have to do it. Congratulations, you just freed up 48 hours in the next year.
Yeah.
So that's great. So it does things like that. Essentially pulls up a plan, it gets your schedule, and then you connect it with different devices and you feed it information. And every time you upload a ride, it will do some rudimentary calculation. And make suggestions if, based upon how you did, you like using some of those rough calculations from the file, but also somewhat informed if you have like HRV. I think that's one of the biggest add-ons, which is, there's so many places we could take this, but yeah.
Right. And that's one thing that I want to talk about. And that's why I told, like, I wanted to get a little bit of background, is I think from my standpoint, a lot of the issues that I see is that it all starts with this like one source of truth. And for FastCat, let's call, like, maybe it's HRV or their OTSS, which is like or OTS, I think, optimized training score.
Sure.
Something like that. Right? Yeah. Trainer Road is using TSS. And so they like anytime. So essentially that's what they're doing, is that they're solving for something. Right. And so it's like pulling these things in, and like the issue that I see is that if it's just to like start off, like TSS is flawed metric.
What?
Because
how dare you?
Because it's based on FTP, which is also a flawed metric, right? It's
what?
Like most people, their FTP is 95% of a 20-minute test, or they did a RAM test or something like that. So when we create our benchmark or whatever our source of truth is, and it's already flawed, then everything coming from that is also flawed. And so like same thing with the HRV is like, you've done a lot of research into this. And I talked to one of the app designers, and it's like, in order for HRV to be like reliable, it needs to be recorded at the same time every day in the same position after you've got like, there's so many things, but people aren't recording it that way. And like Whoop is like one of the biggest like violators or whatever, offenders of that, because it's like, it's just taking random readings throughout the day. And so if it's not a good fit, all of a sudden you get a heart rate of like 205, and that becomes your new max heart rate. And that's what everything's based off of. So anyway, like I just think like that's the biggest issue that I see, is that we're assuming that all the data is accurate, and you know as much as I do, like there's so much bad data out there. So if that's everything driving decisions without a coach's guidance, right?
And this exactly ties into what I was saying before. Like if you're expert coach Dave Schell, you know that the precision that people pretend at in marketing is a gross exaggeration, but you do it because it sells, right? But when you're actually working with somebody, you're like, well, this is a flawed model, but it's still kind of helpful. And this I know is a little bit of a flawed metric, but it's still pretty helpful. So like, you're working with uncertainty and drawing upon your experience and trying to get a read with your athlete and communicating well. It's this dance, but you're pretending that you can like just be a slave to the data. Like if an HRV reading comes in and it's low, oh well, I'm going to totally change my training today. It's like, well, that just betrays that you know nothing about HRV. Like there's 3 assumptions built on top of that, and now you're going to fundamentally change the way that they go about their training or rearrange all their training for it. Another thing that I mentioned in there that isn't even necessarily data related is like, one of the big selling points is rescheduling. Second bullet point down from the email. And as I pointed out, it's like, if you're constantly rescheduling workouts, the issue isn't your calendar, it's your priorities, and AI can't fix that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like, I do think there's value in that, right? It's like, probably one of the biggest things athletes come to us that they're trying to solve for is, what the hell do I do today? Right. And I know when I first started training, I used to drive myself nuts. I hated missing workouts. I'd stress out if like family stuff would pop up or I was sick or something, and I'd like stress about it. And so it's like, yeah, there's value in knowing like how to rearrange things. But like you said, it's like if it's an ongoing thing and if you can never get the workouts in and stuff like that, I don't know. Like I always bring it back to the most simple thing. And for me, a lot of times it's like, I always think the Seiler hierarchy of endurance training needs, right? The bottom one is just like frequency. Well,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so if you can only ride 3 times a week, like it doesn't matter which workout you're doing each week or whatever. It's like, that's the first thing you need to work on. Like, so it's like really like if you're riding 3 hours a week, what you're doing probably doesn't matter as much, right? It's like, it's once you're like training 20 hours a week or 15 hours a week and really trying to like balance those things that it really matters a lot.
Yeah, it's a separate conversation, but until you unlock a certain amount of frequency and volume, it's like you just get that going.
Yeah.
So I can't move the needle for you that much until you're actually making this a part of your life.
And I'll say, like, just real quick, like we're already shitting all over it, and we're going to continue shitting all over it. But it's like, I can see why it's attractive, right? Like paying $20 a month to get a more dynamic training plan, I think is good. I think where I take issue with it is I think it can be harmful, or it's leading you down the wrong road, right? And it gets so overcomplicated trying to be evidence-based, science-backed and stuff that it ends up doing not even like physical harm, but it's like you're not going to hit your potential because it's telling you to rest a lot more than you need to because it's getting like bad readings.
Yeah, it's one of the chief issues in all of like coaching and training is Gebhardt's law, which is when a measure turns into a goal, it ceases to be a good measure. And it's so rife in this space, just like it could be chasing CTL, it could be chasing higher FTP, it could be chasing more time spent at sweet spot, it could be chasing time spent at sweet spot. And what you're really trying to do is cross a distance faster.
Right.
And some of those things are associated, but the app makes it seem like if you do this certain amount, there's like this 1-to-1 thing where you're like it's going to make that happen for you. And it will to a degree, but as I point out, a lot of it is because like you could take any methodology, and if I'm coaching you, Dave, and you're on the couch and I could throw whatever at you, it could be hit. It could be all long, slow distance. It could be anything. Over 6 weeks, your FTP is going to go up a shitload. It's going to skyrocket. But there's so much we take credit for in that like initial noob gains and manipulation, and then incentivize people with these things that don't actually like directly translate like they're marketed to performance.
So we're just all over the place today, and I'm okay with it. So it's funny because I think that's really what got me. That was kind of the tipping point for me, is I kept getting emails and seeing on Instagram from Trainer Road, like 20 watt FTP, like just like increase your FTP, increase the FTP, like all these things. And I'm like, okay, like I need to see what's changed, because I was like one of the first subscribers back in like 2015 or whatever. And at that time it was essentially like, it would build you training plans, or maybe that came a little bit later or whatever, but right. So I haven't had it for a while, but I feel like as a coach, I need to like sign up for these things, see what's changed, see what's new. Like I sign up, I like go through everything, and it's like it's still exactly the same as it was back then. Like I put in I'm like, okay, I'm training for Leadville, so create a training plan for me, a 24-week plan. And I've been riding like 6 to 8 hours a week, right? It starts me off 3 hours a week, everything's sweet spot. Or 3 rides a week, everything's sweet spot, right? Like just going into it, and it's like, okay, how is this AI driven? And it like AI detected my FTP like way too high for me. I'm like, so it's just like. So where I'm going with this is it's like, it's not AI. Like it's a collection of workouts that solves for TSS. And when you miss one, and like I've coached athletes that come from it, it's like you miss a workout. And so what does it do? It just doubles the TSS or whatever, like later in the week, because it's always solving for TSS. If you did 500 this week, you do 550 next week and 600 the next week. And it's like, that's just not how it works.
Yeah, and if it does, that's the problem. This is so complicated. So, because sometimes it can work, but it's like, yeah, you might be one of those people who you could do any, like you're the guy who walks into the gym, looks at a barbell, and like gets biceps, or a girl who does that, and yeah.
No, and I mean, I don't want to keep going on this one, but I think that's why I think it's important to like delineate like what is actually happening, like why is it AI? And so in the case of FastCat or CoachCat, I think it's solving for TSS or their OTS, which is supposed to incorporate sleep and HRV and things like that. But again, if the readings are bad, then the guidance is going to be bad. And then you have Trainer Road where it's like they're solving for TSS as best as I can tell. And like, it's really funny to me because it's like, it'll recommend other workouts, but then at the end it's like, or just pick one, like just pick a random workout, whatever you're in the mood for. So it's like, how is that AI? And so there's another one called Human Go AI. I signed up for that one recently. Same thing. Starts me off at like 3 hours a week and everything's easy. And so it's like, what I'm saying here is it's like, I think they all start from like, it isn't tailored to you. It's not looking at anything that you've done. It's just like, oh, these are our plans and we're going to fit it around your schedule. And when you miss workouts, we'll adjust it for you. That's kind of my takeaway from them.
Yeah. In general, I also think like another thing that I've seen emerging in lots of places is this automatic analysis, but again, it gets at so many things that I think are more complicated. And as you're talking, you're reminding me that there's a bigger problem here, which is that people want a difficult, complicated thing and they want a simple answer for it and a simple prescription. And it's just not that easy.
Yeah, no. And we saw it all the time in TPU, right? Like the performance management chart, CTL, people want that to be their answer to everything. They want it to incorporate life stress and their strength training and all this stuff. And it's just like, that's not what it does. It shows how much have you been riding? How much have you been training recently? Right. And then it's like HRV became that thing. People want this like go or no go. Just tell me should I train or shouldn't I each day? And it's like, I saw something recently and I need to find it again, but it was like talking about different systems. It was like talking about engineering or something. And it was talking about like a simple system, a complex system. And then it talked about like the body is, I can't even remember the word for it, but it's like basically the system where it's like you put a bunch of inputs in and then a bunch of shit we don't know about happens. And then sometimes something like it's never really predictable what's going to come out. We hope that we put in these inputs and that comes out, but it's like so many variables we don't have control over.
Is that the black box? It's just like
something like that. Yeah.
You see what goes in and what comes out, but you have no idea how it necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And it changes by day, right? And we're trying to make it like so predictable, and it's just not. And it's like I think I make athletes crazy a lot of times, especially if they came from something like that, because it's like they want to know, what am I doing 3 months from now? Like, I don't know what you're doing like 4 weeks from now at this point. You know?
Don't know how you've responded. You haven't got that sickness yet. You haven't had that job change yet. You haven't had this yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so I guess, do you have anything else about like CoachCat and like, let's talk about the analysis a little bit and kind of what you saw from that.
Well, here's a simple comment. Nice work on your morning ride name. Pushing it into the anaerobic capacity zone for over 10 minutes is solid, especially as you peak towards 312 watts on your best 1 minute power. And of course, I just went in and tore this apart. I was like, what? I'm like, what does peak toward 312 mean? Did the rider hit 312 watts for a minute, hit it for a split second during the minute, or was it a vibe? Let's pretend we knew what it meant. Is spending 10 minutes in the anaerobic zone solid because they hit 312? Or was it solid to begin with and hitting 312 reinforces its solidness? And while we're here, what the hell does solid mean? I thought this app was super analytical. Is there a definition of solid floating around somewhere that helps me understand what's good or bad? So, I mean, I'm sure it's fine at some level. Like, okay, like if you zoom out and you get a little thing and it's motivating you after your workout, from nothing to that, I think that could be good. Maybe you're motivated to ride more, and then down the line you get more fit and you enjoy yourself. But if you really examine it, and this is back to the whole mansplaining thing, this is like a perfect distillation of mansplaining. As a coach, this means nothing to me. Right. I read this and I'm not any more informed. And then I put a comment that would actually be something I might write to an athlete, which is like, you've got to avoid jargon, get it to something that they're going to understand. You're going to remind them why they're doing it. You're going to look historically to see where this effort compares to other things, but you're also going to look at it in context. Were they trying to go hard? Were they like this? This is again sidebar, like why FTP tests can drive me nuts, because people be like, I haven't gone up. It's like, or my 20-minute hasn't gone up and whatever. It's like, what time frame are you looking at? Are you rested? Are you tired? Were you trying? Which bike? Which power meter? Blah, blah, blah. Like, everybody wants these simple answers. Yeah. Oh, here's a phrase for you, Dave, that we have to use more often. It's from Blocked and Reported, another podcast, but they used to have these t-shirts that said pervert for nuance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I swear, you get into this stuff and you just realize like what's missing is context and nuance.
Yeah. And like, I think that's AI in a nutshell. It doesn't have the nuance, and it's like very good at like pointing out what happened. And we were talking about Strava starting to, they have AI athlete comments or insights now. And it's like, it's essentially looking at your comments. So whatever you commented, it looks at your ride and then just like parrots it back to you. And I saw an example. I don't know if I saw it on Instagram or something, but like some dude got hit by a car, right? And in his comments, he said that he was hit by a car, and then it comes back. It's like, well, great job doing this. This was your longest ride, considering that you and mentioned getting hit by a car, like still encouraging him. And it's like, so it reminds me of, there's this, they'd done studies and they like looked at like new age gurus and stuff like that and would like study the words. And it's like, they would speak in a very like specific way where it's like, they're just talking in circles and it sounds like it makes sense. But when you really dissect it, it's like means nothing. And so somebody created this, new age bullshit generator online.
Oh, yes.
And it's like align your chakra or something. And it just spits out jargon. And that's how I see AI a lot of times, is it's just like giving you a bunch of words that like sound great together. But when you really like dissect it, and I just want to add, like, I think that there's a lot of promise for AI, and we'll come back to that towards the end here, but it's like at the moment, like it's so superficial and just shiny that people are slapping it on without like, really spending the time to get it working the way it could.
Oh, it's definitely a meme. I mean, Cody, one of your former colleague, my current colleague, was just like, God, every app that I turn to now, people are just cynically slapping an AI addition to their like everything is AI. Just because they feel like, if they don't have that, people are going to say, well, what are you not doing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's finish at like, I guess like any other kind of takeaways about the pitfalls of these AI coaches at the moment.
So just like all it can do is pull from, again, LLMs work by saying what's the most likely next word. And so they can come up with plausible mansplained things, but it's still based upon whatever data set it's been trained on. And one of the greater struggles, if you've been in the endurance space for a long time, is data. Like, we have data overload now, and yet we still haven't even come close to properly and reliably describing what's going on in the black box. We don't know. We try. We continue to try, but it's still really hard. So whatever AI has to say, it's like, it's pulling that based upon those data points. But you well know as a coach, like let's say AI could make perfect comments about workout files and trends and fitness things from power files that you uploaded to it. Is that going to be enough? No, you've got to know, like, as a coach, you have to know your athlete. after a long enough time working with somebody, working with an athlete, what do the conversations begin to be about? Once they've nailed the fundamentals and they're crossing the T's, dotting their I's, they're nailing their nutrition, getting their sleep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes about like an upstairs thing, or like, hey, why are you said something funny, something jumped out, you sounded a little dark back there. Is there something you need to talk about?
Well, no, I think where we kind of started with this, and you talked about it, moving around workouts and stuff, but if the fundamental issue is just being consistent, it's not solving, it's being reactive. It keeps moving workouts around, keeps moving, where it's like, I feel like a lot of times my job as a coach is trying to like find out what are those barriers and help to make it more consistent, like come up with strategies so that you can ride your bike more often and get your workouts in and stuff like that. And it's, so yeah, I think kind of like you were saying, it's like, I think a lot of times athletes come to me and they hire a coach because they think it's all about the data and it's the workouts and stuff like that. But it's like, that's such a small piece of what we're doing. And it's like everything else, and like really finding like, what is your barrier to success and how do we address that? And rarely is it the power or the, workout and stuff like that. It's usually like some other thing happening. Even if it's like I'll use you as an example, you're notorious for your bike falling apart. That's a barrier. That's a barrier to success. It's not going to come through in a higher FTP, right?
No, sadly, no. It's probably antagonistic.
Well, when I'm using you as an example because I coach somebody right now who's very fast, but like when we were doing our end of season review, one of them was like, "Well, your goal for next year is just to like make it to the end of a race without a flat, without going over the bars, just get to the end of the race. Like, so let's see if we can make that happen." And so I think like, and I get that from Nate, right? Like just identifying the low hanging fruit. And it's, for me, it's like a lot of times not the workouts.
Yeah, no, I would say for most people, it's not. That different podcast conversation, but essentially most of us are embedded in or have some sort of lifestyle within our society that makes it kind of hard for one reason or the other, whether it's work stress, relationship stress, being on your screen too much, not sleeping, and like whatever, that's actively like really the handbrake on your performance. Yeah. You just might not notice it. You just think it's just, you're the fish in the water and you're just like, it's just water. It's like,
Yeah. I always use the forest and the trees, but that's a good way to look at it too, right? It's like athletes, when they're in it, a lot of times they just don't recognize it.
I tell them this all the time. I'm like, I'm here because you're like, anybody who's doing something, you're your worst blind spot. You're in it.
Yeah.
You can't do the Zwift thing where you can change the camera and like see yourself from with a drone.
Yeah. So what are I definitely see benefits with AI and I use it all the time.
Yeah.
What do you see as the potential benefits for coaches?
It's going, one thing we already touched on, which is going to take tedious rote tasks. And as long as you have some sort of like rules you feed into it, it's going to do that for you. So it's going to make you more effective as a coach. Because ultimately I think, and that's a good thing, because you want coaches to focus on those low-hanging fruits and reading between the lines. And if there's lots of kind of like paper shuffling and minutia that's pulling at their bandwidth, then instead of like, metaphorically filing things away or getting things organized, they're spending a bunch of time on that rather than like, hey, I'm noticing this thing. It frees up more bandwidth to focus on the things that are going to matter more to the athlete.
Right.
I also think number two, and I think this is going to require a lot from the coach, but it's going to allow the coach to make connections that they would never have been able to make before if they get good at using it and know what to look for, I think.
And I would agree with those things, because kind of what I see it becoming, and probably one of the things I struggle with most as a coach, is we can only hold so many things in our memory, right? And it's usually around 3 things. And there's a reason the phone number is 7 digits. It's because, and so if you've been working with an athlete for 2, 3, 6 years, trying to remember every race they've done, every injury they've had, every bike they have, like all these things. And so it's like, I see it becoming a memory, right? And being able to hold all these things simultaneously so that like when I need to remember something about an athlete, I could say, when was the last time the athlete did this race and what was their time or whatever? And it can like pull it up for me. I also see it, like you said, it's with data. And it's funny because we were talking about this probably in like 2016 or something. Remember big data? Mm-hmm. And like Garmin Slipstream was like, everything was big data, and it like kind of fell off. But it's like, that's been the promise, right? Is we have all this data and we're going to start like surfacing insights and stuff, but it's yet to happen. And so like, I feel like we're close. I feel like there's a potential there, but actually being able to see like normalizing for like temperature and stuff, like we were talking about like different bikes and altitude and all these things, and like actually being able to see trends in power, normalizing for temperature and elevation and fatigue and like all these other things, right? And so I'm excited about that stuff, but I think blindly following it is like it's a tool, and I think it's going to be used as a tool. But when we try to replace humans with it, I think like it doesn't have the nuance.
No, and I mean this racing, all this stuff happens out in the real world. I've been sort of batting this article back and forth in my head, like. And one of the answers is obvious, but the question is, do you as a coach need to be faster than your athlete to coach them?
I would be screwed.
and the answer to that is obviously no. The answer to that is of course not. But on the other hand, taken to the extreme, would you be able to feel credibility as a coach if you had like no experience in the thing you were coaching? You hadn't ridden, you hadn't done any events, you hadn't done intervals, you hadn't done any of that stuff yourself? Would you think you'd be able to, let's say you had studied it though. Like essentially, like metaphorically, you had read everything there is to know about how to shoot a basketball, but you'd never played basketball.
Well, so I'm going to say this and you'll probably rip it off and use it in your article or something. It's something I think about a lot, and it's something that like really kind of makes me crazy is like there's a difference between information and knowledge.
Yeah.
I can read a lot and I can get information, but knowledge is the experience, like having applied that information and learning that there's nuance to it, right? And that's like I've seen it. If we go back to the Dunning-Kruger thing, and now we're like going off another topic, but like the less you know, the more you think you know, and the more you know, the less you think you know, right? And we're like, and that's what you see is that like you're very confident and you think that there's a few ways to do things and things are simple, and then you realize like over and over, like it depends, and there's like all these other things happening. And so I think that's where like bringing it back to the AI, it's like it doesn't have knowledge, it has information.
Right. Yes. Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at. It lacks that subjectivity bridge. It has the information and it'll advance the simulacrum of it. They'll be like, well, this is what it's like to ride. It's like, you've never ridden. You're a machine.
Not yet. No. Yeah. So what do you see other potential uses for it?
This isn't gonna interest athletes that much, but from a coaching perspective, I think you're going to have to probably, like viably, to make it easier on you to create a living and continue to improve your coaching. Because AI is going to take lots of, I'm going to call it, this is how Hillary didn't win the election. Low information, deplorable AI endurance users. It's going to take that. And then people who are in the know are going to see the value of getting coached by a Dave and able to like pay the bills. And you're going to have some sort of distillation of Dave coaching for the low information voters, which is going to free you up to do what you're really passionate about, is working one-on-one with committed real people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that brings up another good point too, that I wanted to mention, and now I'm drawing a blank on it.
I made it political. I told you I wouldn't. I'm sorry.
I'll cut this out, but I'm like trying to think of what I. Damn it! It'll have to come back to me now. Anyway, all right. Any other last thoughts on AI and how people might use it going forward?
I still think, I think athletes and coaches can both get a lot out of it, but I would say that educating yourself is still going to be paramount, because the AI is never, at least at this point, it never admits where its knowledge ends and its speculation begins, but it seems all very plausible. So you knowing what's BS and not, but moreover, knowing some things to look for is going to empower everybody. And there's no excuse not to, because you can learn a lot. I remember, like, you talking about, back in the good old days. Well, remember Alan Couzens? He was always like, his big thing was learn to code, because it'll empower you as your coach to explore data in ways that are novel to you. If you have some sort of thought experiment and you have some data that might shine some lights on something, you have to be able to manipulate it. Right. And this is the same way, like, and it can be stupid as an athlete. Like, I do this all the time too. I'll put something in, I'll kind of use it as a journal entry, and then it'll remember for me, like, it seems like you're trending in this way after doing X. And it's like, wow, that's actually really helpful. So it could be helpful to you as an athlete, and certainly helpful as a coach that way.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that we're going to see, and so like I've done a podcast in the past about this, is there's a hype curve, right? And I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's like peak of inflated expectations, trough of disillusionment, and then plateau of productivity. And so we see that with every new thing that comes out, whether we're talking about ketones or HRV or like any new device, like everybody's excited about it, then you don't hear about it. And then if it like makes it through that, then it gets adopted, but like in a more pragmatic sort of way. And so we saw this, like what I see right now, and it reminds me of when I went to culinary school, there was this whole slow food movement. And it, like, I think Whole Foods was like kind of born out of that too, where it was like this idea of like slowing down, getting rid of fast food, and actually making food again, like from scratch. And so we see it with beer, like all the microbrews, right? Like people got tired of the big mass produced things and wanted to like start doing artisan beers and stuff like that. And so I'm starting to see it with YouTube. Like I can hear, like there's so many videos and you can hear that it's AI voices, the way that it talks and like stuff like that. And people are going to like want authenticity. And so they're going to start rejecting that. Like there's something about humans and imperfection, right? Like we need it. Like that's real. And so I think at some point, like this pendulum is going to start swinging the other way too, where people start to reject it a little bit and actually want that human connection and not just some random voice reading things off to you.
I love that point. The funniest thing I've heard down that line of thought, though, is that authenticity is what we're all going to crave as long as it's verified by the blockchain. Because AI will get so good that you're going to have to verify that this is real.
Oh, I think we're very close to that at this point.
I know, it's disturbing.
Yeah. So,
and also, one more thing. I got to fit in one more joke. Also, while you were talking about things hitting the hype curve, they're saying this about AI, like the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And man, like I'll get hit with people all the time that think it's like 2018 and are like, ketones are so hot. And I'm like, no, they're not. Like they were hot.
Yeah.
And I feel like AI is like that. You talk to some people and they're so far down the rabbit hole, they've built themselves agents and they're like prompting and coding with cursor, even though they can't like run a Python script. And then you talk to somebody else and they're like, what? I just Google things.
Yeah, exactly. On there, I asked Jeeves. Right?
Ask Jeeves, baby.
Where can people find you?
You can find me at gravelgodcycling.com, and I also have a Substack. I'll put it in the links for the podcast.
Awesome. And where are you on Instagram?
I am Gravel God. Wait, let me.
Don't everybody go follow me at once.
Don't follow me at once. I'm creeping up. Gravel God Cycling. There you have it.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate this, and we'll do it again soon.
Can't wait.